practicing attorney for a number of years here in the Houston area, and now running for the position to be Houston's first Black woman to serve as mayor of the fourth largest city in our nation. So I want to share with you a little bit about my background so that you all have a sense of kind of the journey I took and how I navigated a fairly unique space in the law, but then used it in ways that were not necessarily traditional. I grew up here in Houston, born and raised on the north side. In fact, I went to Eisenhower High School, which is in the Aldine Public School District. When I was growing up, my dad was diagnosed with cancer. He had something called multiple myeloma. And it was at an early age, because of my father's diagnosis, that I really began to understand and appreciate that public service and being in public office should be about more than just having a swivel chair and a placard with your name on it. I remember asking my dad questions like, what would happen if the insurance company, because I was learning about insurance at the time, I was a young teenager, and I would ask my dad questions like, what happens if they say no to the experimental treatments they were trying at the time? And he would just look at me and say, well, we'd have to figure something else out. And I remember at that time feeling really unsettled about that response. We just have to figure something else out. That seems like a gap in policy to me. And when I thought about that in context of what was happening in our lives, with our family, and what happens in the lives of so many people, public service really is about making strong decisions, making good decisions, and taking action where people need you most. It's about taking action and not being a spectator, not doing what's just politically expedient, but thinking about people. And so that fueled my journey in public service and even in the practice of law as I then began to move along. So my dad did pass away when I was 17, but born from that experience was really a motivation to really make a difference where people are put first instead of the politics. So I took that experience with me, went to Emory University undergrad. When I was in undergrad, I was president of my college, but I also served as a community building fellow. So I was working in community development corporations, trying to figure out how we could use these organizations in communities to make a difference. I did that work. I was president of my college, and then I graduated from Emory. Then I had the fortune of going to work for somebody by the name of Congresswoman Jackson Lee. Do y'all know who that is? Okay. So y'all also know that I worked very hard for Congresswoman Jackson Lee, because the needs of the community are in fact very great. They are urgent. They would not be calling the office if they were not. And so I took that experience with me, then went on to Harvard Law School. While I was at Harvard, I had the fortune of working for some very strong legal minds and people who are well known to date. I worked for then Professor Elizabeth Warren. She was just Professor Warren to us, and she later, of course, became Senator Warren, and of course became a presidential nominee and vying for the 2020 ticket. I also had the great fortune of being mentored by Charles Ogletree, who is a civil rights leader, expert of our time, who helped to lead the efforts on the Tulsa race riot or race massacre of 1921. We actually went with Professor Charles Ogletree to Washington and escorted the original survivors that were still living to Washington so that they could try to receive justice in their case. We actually filed a petition in the Supreme Court on that case, and so he did it. He just had the great wisdom to know that it was important to connect the next generation to that experience. We were just law students at the time, and I want to encourage you as law students, whatever you're doing, make sure that as you matriculate in your journey, always open that door, create that opportunity for the next generation to follow behind. Even if it's the next year to follow behind, you always want to keep that door open. You always want to create shared experiences. Had Professor Ogletree just gone to Washington by himself, not brought any of us with him, I wouldn't be standing here talking about that story as part of my own foundation.